Greetings, this is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, your Lord and Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome one and all. I hope you're all having a great day and are ready to dive back into the world of Athas. Yes, we're heading back to Dark Sun today. I got another one of the city-states to talk about, and an interesting one which I found some details about that we can talk about, but when we dive into it, we'll discuss it. It's some interesting little factoids and things like that. But, of course, you're joining me. Hey, you're here. You're with me now. Whether that's live on Twitch when I record this, we all hang out and chat a little bit afterwards and stuff like that and go over some details of this, or, if you're joining me on YouTube, which most of you tend to do. Remember, please do all the normal stuff to appease the various algorithms and stuff of YouTube, like, subscribe, move out, and stuff like that. I gotta give those shout-outs at least once a video. I'll shout myself out a little bit more at the end of the video. The we're here, we're now shout-out, that's now. Anyway, enough of that. You're here to learn about Raam. And I'm here to tell you about Raam. And, of course, well, normally I start these things about, like, oh, here's a bunch of books and stuff you can see, but there's more. There's one book. It's the book I've been using for all this. It's the 4E Dark Sun campaign setting book. Now, I am going to say, from some of the other research I did, it was something that I didn't get as much in any of the other city-states as I got to now until Raam. Maybe it wasn't noticeable, maybe it was there, but there's inconsistencies. What do I mean by that? Well, I want to talk about this here to start out with. I'm going to be talking about the 4E version of Raam. This is equivalent to the original Dark Sun campaign settings information. I have that book. I have a copy of it that I was looking up, that I'd gotten years ago online with a set of books that I got that were old PDFs that I had purchased. Anyway, also in amongst them was another book, the Dark Sun campaign setting for 2nd edition, revised, that came out in '95, around a time of revised edition of 2nd edition AD&D. That's a whole mess. We're not talking about the day versions of AD&D and stuff like that, but this was around the AD&D time. Like, this is 4th edition, but AD&D. Anyway, there was a bunch of story changes that they talked about, and they discussed. I'm not really going to go into those story changes. I'm going by what the 4E book has, which was the original campaign setting book matches. So these are the two original campaign settings back in the time of the original run of Dark Sun. There was a bunch of story changes they talked about in a book. Okay? Maybe some of the story changes would be retconned. Maybe they wouldn't. I don't know what 4E was planning. I'll probably do a video after I'm done all this essay of stuff. That. I might mention these in more videos if it comes up, but I think this is the video where it really matters because Abalak Ray, according to the revised one, died. She's alive as a 4th edition book. She's alive in the first one. But in those storylines, she died. Another Sorcerer's King, Sorcerer Queen in this sense, died. And Raam became worse in that storyline. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that might have been a storyline that was planned originally to continue to explore in 4E, but since we didn't get the same kind of success we got in 4E as we would have in 2nd edition, we don't see those same kind of development storylines. We really only saw a couple of books in 4th edition. Many questions that I plan to explore in the future, but this is the point in time I did want to talk about it, because I stumbled upon it and learned about it. So, yeah, this entire tirade is an interesting idea of information that I'm telling you, yes, if you look up some information online, you can see some differences there. I'm talking about from these baselines, because again, when I learned about baseline, I went back and read those older books just to see if there was major differences, and from between those two the original AD&D campaign setting book and this campaign setting book, they're very similar. So that's why I'm just using this one from 4th edition. This was like the most updated timeline of events. So keep that in mind too. Shall we get started though, now that I've gone on this tirade of explaining some things that was an interesting thing that I ran into. And we have this nice Guardian of Raam, or Gehedron of Raam, which is where I'm starting out with images because There's no images in the line, so I have to do my best here. He's from Raam. So what is Raam? What do we know about Raam? Well, it is an ancient place. It is an old city-state. It was once wonderful. But it has fallen greatly. Basically, the countryside surrounding it have been plundered for its resources. There's been a lot of corruption in the government, a lot of hedonism, and basically the Sorcerer Queen herself has become completely disinterested in the politics. And so because of this disconnection between the ruler and allowing the people to basically fight over resources, consume them, destroy, the city-state is collapsing. At this point in time, it is at the brink of disintegration. I wouldn't say quite disintegrates with her death, but it gets technically worse. Mention. So, like, they had alabaster quarries, they had gemstone mines. All are exhausted. The agricultural passages that agricultural practices they've been doing are very much so stripping the land, making a lot of food shortage problems. In the streets, if you would visit the city, violent factions battle against each other for control. And so this place is in ruins in a lot of ways. And daily, you will find riots against the ineffectual ruler. Basically, Abalak Ray. You'll find riots against her, which is so different than so many other city-states where, the way of things is. But no, she's holed up, protected, these riots don't mean much. And a lot of her Templars just don't even bother going into most city districts. They're keeping at arm's length, keeping the city and its chaos to itself. So things could have been averted if Albrak Ray actually got involved and, strong-armed things. It's one of those things is... Think about when we talked about Tyr. Tyr was on the brink, but there was a figurehead who was able to keep the powers in check, and has been able to keep the powers in check to keep the city in order. Replacement, the current ruler of Tyr, has been doing that job, but is in a tenuous position. No one took up the mantle, because rather than a dead Sorcerer King, we have one that just has pushed themselves off and allowed them to rule themselves, but without any guidance, without any major players, so just competition and chaos. Albert Gray has just had an appetite for pleasure these last few generations and stuff. Many generations ago, she basically abandoned her royal title and declared herself instead to be representative of an all-powerful all-powerful deity, there goes English for me for a second, Badna. She basically called herself the Grand Vizier, which was normally a title held by the mystics of Raam, the greatest of them all. So she raised the existing shrines and temples, replaced most of them with new shrines dedicated to Badna, and the deity's image, that of a grinning four-armed male dressed in a long loincloth, is all over the place. And she continues to assure people that Badna watches her closely, and will strike her dead if she falters in her duties, but at this point in time, no one really believes her. Honestly speaking, the goodwill she had at the time of this happening, all gone, after so many generations of crap. So yeah, it's just been a mess in the city-state because of that. But we can take a look at it at a little bit of a glance to learn a little bit more about its people. And, this is a scene in Raam. So, what can we know about the city-state statistic-wise that we know about? It's got strife, it's got squabbling factions, riots, unrest, and basically, if you are outside where the Sorcerer Queen's palace is, it's all damaged. Like, the Sorcerer Queen's maintained her place just by being a Sorcerer Queen. It's sort of like, there is no united front against her, because, just the situation she's put it in. In Tyr, Sorcerer King tried to murder a lot of people and got everybody pissed off. Everybody united against them. Here, she just fucks off. She doesn't really do anything. So it's sort of like, there isn't really united anger against her. People hate her, but they're all like, she's just over there doing whatever the fuck she wants. We're too busy dealing with each other. It's such a mess. It's such a mess caused by her disinterest. So, more than 40,000 people live here. So it is a very populous city-state. One of the most populous ones. Because also another 40,000 dwell in basically warlord-dominated states surrounding the city. Humans are only about half that population, with elves and dwarfs being the most numerous minorities, and moles, half-giants, and half-elves making up the rest. For water, they have a deep reservoir below the city, and it does provide enough to sustain the populace and irrigate the fields beyond. So they actually do have a pretty good water supply. That's not a problem. Water, not a problem. Now, if you wanted something other than water, well, the mines pick clean, and, with the current unrest constantly over generations, no one really wants to trade there very much. So, not a lot of trade, not a lot of goods, not a lot of supplies. There is enough commodities to lure a few merchants to, brave everything. Silver, gemstones, flint, steel, rugs, art, and textiles still do get shipped out of the city. Maybe not in numbers as they used to be, but does mean there still is a trade structure just paralyzed, weakened, not as good as it used to be. Now for defense, the Man Sabdars form the heart of the largest army in the region, leading thousands of wretched slave soldiers. In addition, Albak Day hoards weapons and armor and equipment in a basically massive armory beneath her palace. So not only is there a very powerful force here that keeps things from boiling over too much, we'll talk about it, but another thing the Sorcerer Queen have is massive amounts of gear. And the last thing that usually they mention with the at a glance of these cities is a place you might be able to stay if you visit. There's a few. Most have closed. Basically, shuttered themselves up. There isn't people coming to visit. There's no reason to keep going. And so, inns and taverns, mostly gone. There are a few near the city gates, where they compete for the rare people that come into the city. The rare customers that actually dare to come in. So, yeah, you can see things aren't great in Raam. Now here is one of our few images of good old Abalak Bey. I'm trying not to butcher her name, but, names, I always butcher them. If you've been here very long, I always butcher them really bad. So, she is physically alluring. The centuries have not done anything to hurt that. She has always been seen as a voluptuous figure and youthful as the day that she seized the throne of Raam. That is one of the things being a nigh immortal Sorcerer Queen has kept for her. Her beauty. It stayed intact. And also, we'll talk about in the future the caste system. She is one of the weird exceptions to the caste system because she basically has the power and arrogance to basically ignore it and made something that was outside the caste system for herself. A lot of the citizens view their technical ruler through this prism of cultural stigmas. For 500 years, basically, she's had dalliances and scandals, involved herself with both people from the lowest castes to those of the highest ones. So, she's contemptful and unclean, they're seen as, effectively, 500 years of hedonism kind of stands out. And nearly the 30 generations that she's ruled the city, she's basically taken on a lot of mates and has had a lot of children. She doesn't really care for most of them. She usually discards them or keeps them depending on what mood she has at the time. If she abandons one at birth, they're usually given to a noble Nawab family and raised as foster children. So basically, 100 or so of her current living descendants, known as the offspring, dwell among the citizenry. And many of these manifest unusual magic or psionic talents. there are rumors that she's manipulating her children with sorcerer's energy before they're born, and she passes some of her gifts on to them, and onto their own children in turn. And even some rumors speak of that she's going to be using these offspring for some kind of reason. She's growing old, and she wants to move her intellect into a younger version of her body. Or she's preparing for a great ritual that she needs to score people with her bloodline for. Or some even claim that she can't die as long as her children remain alive, because she's put parts of her essence into them. A lot of rumors about this fact that she does have a lot of people that trace their lineage to her. When a lot of people in the city can say that, it's an interesting fact. Not she cares about any of them, honestly. Probably not. As much as she kept them around briefly, and then forgot about them. Moved on to the next. So she does have Templars. That's not disputed in this entire mess of a city, but not quite as many of the other Sorcerer Queens and Kings. She has very few of them. Basically, when she needs a new one, she performs some divinations, discovered a younger citizen who has the potential for the magic she wants them to have. She removes those candidates from their family, regardless of castes, and trains them to be a Templar for her. They take new names and are outside the caste system, much like their mistress. They're not bureaucrats, and the city-state has many ranks of officials that oversee civil administration instead. So, yeah, they're basically the eyes and ears of Abalakre. They represent the Grand Vizier's interests and instructing officials and functionaries in her will. So if there's something she desires, passes of Templars go to the officials, and so they mostly listen to that kind of thing. But again, with the current problems in the city, it is actually quite dangerous for her Templars to walk the streets without armed escorts, without soldiers that are protecting them, And there are a bunch of them that actually barricade themselves in their estates, basically ignoring their duties to their queen. They'd rather hide and be safe. The Man Sabdars. I mentioned them, but they are effectively what could be called the police, city watch, and soldiers of Raam. Said they're fairly numerous. There's enough of them that if Raam was actually attacked, they could raise up and fight. That's one thing about the chaos and death and problems within Raam. They're still Raam. They're going to unite together against any force that would invade them, and then get back to their own fights. Now, they are a mundane part of the civil administration, and they have loose supervision by the Templars. Basically, the Grand Vizier's laws, enforcing them, that's their main duty. But, and there's a big old but, the amount of corruption in their system and with them is massive. There is a lot of corruption. So most of them are basically on the payroll of someone, whether it be a warlord or a wealthy merchant. And when they are on a payroll, they spend most of their time basically keeping an eye out for things related to that patron's interests. If I'm on the payroll of a warlord, I might be keeping an eye on other warlords to see if they're up to something. Or if I'm a merchant, I might rival merchants. That kind of thing. Other members of the Man Sabdars shake down commoners and artisans in their districts, work for criminal gangs, or basically arrest whoever they're paid enough money to arrest. And given the corruption here and the breakdown of Templar authority, basically Albak-Ray relies more on not Man Sabdars, but another group similar to them. I'm going to butcher this one. Kotaga, who are basically a secret police to enforce her will. They are an arm of the civic government. They're loosely overseen by Templars, much like the Man Sabdars, but they're effectively assassins. Hiding amongst the populace, striking without warning, eliminating undesirables who cause too much trouble in the city. Yeah. And our final group amongst the power structures here, because we got, our Templars, our cops, the secret police, the Nawab, warlords. The nobility of Raam. They are warlords! Nawab is the term for the noble class. Okay? Great. Now we know that. They're basically families of the highest caste, below priests in the caste system of Raam. They have estates, which most of them are fortified with mercenary guards, and basically wage war against each other to crush opposition and rally supporters. Each of these warlord factions, each of these noble families is an armed faction, and effectively can be described as bandits, paying for tolls for anybody that seeks to use their roads to cross their lands. It's pretty bad. Each Mansabdar, mercenary, criminal gang, and commoner in Raam swears allegiance to one of these warlords. If they don't, they basically risk enmity from all of them. So it's better to be on one guy's side than no one's side. And the current leader of these warlords, effectively, the top tier one, if you would, or some of the top tier ones, are Nawab Marham, who's basically a human demagogue who's a crime lord and controls the gangs in the poorest areas of the city. There's Nawab Urdan Moor, a militant dwarf, who's in control of the arena, and many Mansabdars. And of course, Nawab Shialha, a female elf with strong ties to the elven tribes outside the city. So, species doesn't matter for being a noble in this case, because again, we'll talk about it just now, you can theoretically change your caste systems, and you can become a Nawab in certain circumstances. That is not something that's impossible. It's something that can be earned, but it's not an easy earning. So most stay in their castes. Let's talk about the caste system, because that is an important part of the culture here. This is when there are many markets. We'll talk about the markets, but I thought it was a good picture here. So each Raamanite is part of a caste. And you are part of that caste until you die, in most situations. Customs traditionally disallow marriages between different castes, or even casual interactions. And if you do have them, they're usually brief and irregular. Here are the castes, if you want to understand the city. At the top are the priests. Mystics known as Sadhus, who hold the respect of all Raamanites. This rank, of course, has been compromised by priests of Badna, who are seen as less worthy. Again, Badna was the big thing. Honestly speaking, now it's a mixture. Badna's still there, and pretty big, but all the old religions are still there, too. And the priests of the older religions have more respect than Badna ones, but it's kind of messed up the entire caste. Then there's the Nawab, who are the noble warlord families. The Viziers, who are public servants, bureaucrats, officials. They wear colorful silk robes to denote their office. Albak Ray refers to herself as Grand Vizier, of course, but she's not connected with the Vizier class. Yeah. There's the warrior caste. The Mansabdars, mercenaries, and soldiers belong to that caste. The merchant class, who buys and sells goods created by others who belong to the caste. The laborers, who includes common artisans, farmers, herders, poor free citizens. It's by far the most populous and most disaffected by everything that's going on. Honestly speaking, the battles between noble families don't normally involve the more normal people here to a great degree. There is chaos there, but your average person in the cities just wants to make sure they get some food and survive. It's just another day in Athas. Then there's the slave caste. And this is an unusual part about the slave caste here. Is upon gaining freedom, a former slave can assume a new caste. So slaves can find freedom within Raam, and when they do, they find themselves in a caste, probably wherever they earn. If they were a great warrior and fought in the gladiatorial arenas, then maybe they will find themselves in warrior caste. If they have a knack for something that would put them in the merchant class, or perhaps in the laborer class. Probably not labor above that, but again, you would always have new nobles that have earned their way there through ways. It's not impossible, especially if you catch the eye of the Sorcerer Queen. And finally, at the bottom, there's the unclean, the lowest caste. Basically, anybody handling carcasses or corpses falls in that category. I do not know if you hear that. The air raid siren. There's probably a fire at this time of day. Probably tradition uses that. If you don't, shall we explore the city? Because there's a bunch of areas we know about most of the districts and things that you can discover in the city, and that's a good thing. And here is a nice map of Raam. This one better without cutting off things? Let me check it out. That one's better. We'll use this one, because it's a little more zoomed in. So, Raam had a pretty good irrigation system, and have a pretty good amount of water. And basically, they transformed the natural scrubland into a rich, verdant area that ringed the city for miles. This is the height of Raam. It rivaled Draj in grain production. It had date orchards that were second to none. It was a grand place. But now, many fields are fallow, burned, or salted. Because, as I mentioned, all those Nawab warlords have their estates in the territory surrounding the city proper. They're out in their estates, ruling over them as bandit warlords over the roads, effectively. They're still connected with the city, they still compete with each other, but they have these estates, and they battle with each other. Raiders and the warlords have just fought each other so much that's led to destruction of their farming infrastructure. So there are food shortages and higher prices for basic foodstuffs within the city because of this. Now, the Road of Kings and the Neebulous Road lead directly into the city from the north and west, west, south, and east. The Neebulous Road coming up to the bottom, north, Road of Kings going through there. The estates along these roads charge you a fee to go along there because you're passing by our walls, turrets, and garrisons that are protecting it. And so, if you're passing a road, you'll probably have to pay toll. And within their estates, the crude huts of field slaves lie clustered in small, squalid hamlets between the estates. So yes. And these three great ways meet at the plaza in the Circle Market, middle of the city of Raam. We'll talk about the Circle Market. It isn't good anymore. Now, as much as we have this part of the city, we have to still leave the city. We gotta go north. North into the land north of the Palace of the Sorcerer Queen, into a barren, unfit area, terrible for cultivation. But Ammonites will travel this road north, beyond the Queen's Palace, for nearly a mile, across a narrow pathways, because here lies the gladiatorial arena, where these warriors duel for their lives. Its floor is small, in comparison to many other city-state standards, bounded on one side by a steep hill pocketed with veiled observation balconies, and the other by a great chasm known as the Maw. Ammonites take seats just across from the chasm, basically to ensure no saboteur would interfere with the games or make an attempt on the Grand Vizier's life. Let's watch. The Ghost City. It's a kind of little boil that you can see on the map there on the one side. It's the home of the unclean. Morticians, butchers, tanners, basically any unpleasant industry sets up their shop there. Those that are there cannot escape from the caste at all. They are certainly the most they're the ones that are definitely not leaving their caste. But the good news is they're not in danger of being enslaved. They are less than slaves, so no one wants them down there. You know, some advantages. And the crematory is there, and from day through night, smoke will rise from it and spread its ash upon the area. So yeah. And the chapter of the Veiled Alliance of Raam secretly convenes beneath the crematorium under leadership of Nanda Sharti, who is a offspring. The Coins Quarter, which was once very prosperous. Not so much anymore. Told you there was a fire. Fire! Anyway, as I was saying, the Coins Quarter. It's the eastern portion of Raam. Basically, with the civil unrest, trade's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. And so, basically, the quarter, which was once a fabulous trade center, has become a gathering of armed encampments built around merchant houses in the city-state. You know, effectively, each of the merchant houses that are attempting to trade there kind of, build themselves up. Now, there is also a museum here. So, kind of fall in the Gallery of Seven Stars. Keep that in mind, too. And the offices of House McKay. House McKay is a merchant house here that has done very good for themselves. Because they saw the writing on the wall with the decline of Raam. And basically spreads fortunes to the fort's First Watch, Athas, and Zaltz. And all arranged outside the city-state. They moved their wealth out. They moved a lot of their control out. Their estates still command a large portion of the district. But defense there is far more important than resuming commerce. Because the patriarch basically conducts business from those three forts, while his heir basically is set to look over the family's holding in Raam. So, keeping the business going, while the heir basically is like, hey, look, your job right now as the heir apparent is to make sure our important setup within Raam remains ours. You don't have to do anything there other than make sure we keep it. Temple Quarter, opposite the Coins, closer to the western gate, is the spiritual center. They're small shrines devoted to thousands of spirits and powers venerated by Raamites. They crowd the wide thoroughfares and winds northeast through the city to the Queen's Hill. Each boasts idols, mosaics, and friezes depicting the pantheon of the city. And of course, scattered amongst these older structures are the shrines dedicated to Badna, who kind of moved in here and originally was trying to replace everything until everybody was like, wait a second, this is bullshit. Yeah. There is a place known as the Garden Benevolence, which is basically the place where elders are laid to rest. It's a place where old people can spend their final days in peace, comfort, and meditation. So if you enter the Garden Benevolence, if you're part of your proper caste, you basically can see rest and passing away peacefully. Though lower castes may not be able to find themselves there. And there's also the School of the Way, who's a psionic academy. The official quarters is in the center of Rome, and it's dominated by sprawling complexes of administration buildings, courts, records, halls, barracks for the Mansabdar, and more. Most Templars in this area have secured themselves in palaces in this quarter, where they're guarded by well-paid mercenaries and magic monsters. And this is where the Circle Market is. Well, was? It kind of is still there. The Circle Market still exists. It was the center of the Road of Kings, as it kind of met in the middle here, and the Nibelese Road, so it was a very good trade spot at one point in time. And it had city markets, elven markets, no distinctions between them. And there was a time that this place was filled with booths and displays and merchants and artisans, and that is not. An image of a market that seemed dead, that's what you have. So locals peddle some goods and materials they can, but, market's mostly a meeting place or maybe a skirmishing ground between warlord factions, so they can kind of take over. The Low Quarter. This is a large, sprawling district in the southern part of the city-state. Many neighborhoods, none of them very well off. Most citizens of Raam live here. Narrow, twisting streets that lead to residential communes, trade quarters, slums, marketplaces, and a few shrines here and there. Simple buildings of wood in the nicer areas, and daub and wattle in the worst. And the last century has been kind of hard on it, and many sections are in ruin. Rubbish clutters the walkways, and homeless citizens take what shelter they can. Now, for a little Athian map, which you can see, I can kind of point out on here. I'll put my cursor on. There's Raam. So right here. Here's the King's Road. Here's the Nivelese Road. There's Raam. There's Traj. So you can see where it's connected with it. And over here's Tyr. So yeah, there you go. So I'll use the bigger one then now that I've pointed out, so you can see the full map of the region. Okay. Final thing to talk about today is the Queen's Hill. Because this is the northwestern corner of Raam. It has had some troubles with its elegant gardens and quiet pools replaced by imposing walls and breastworks and bristling dishes. Basically, as the chaos and combat have begun to spread towards there, this area that is the center point of the Grand Vizier's power has been threatened. It commands a view of the entire city-state, a steep grassy ridge in the northwest corner. The Ivory Palace is here, which is the Grand Vizier's palace. The crown jewel of the hill, a citadel constructed of ivory and alabaster, studded with gemstones inlaid with silver. It's a testimony to Abalakde's excess. It contains hundreds of rooms, great halls, ballrooms, kitchens, bedrooms, treasure vaults, and more. And on sound nights, you can still hear the revelry from the palace, drifting down to those below. And, of course, beneath those dollars, expensive caverns that house things like her prized silk worms. That's a WYRMS. Keep that in mind. The royal barracks are here, too, in this region. Basically, the Grand Vizier permitted the royal barracks to be moved inside this area for a defensive perimeter, not far from the gate that grants access to Queen's Hill. So 1,000 of the best, most loyal soldiers to the Sorcerer Queen are here. Basically, she's got 1,000 loyal soldiers that she has within Queen's Hill protecting it. The Hall of Conquest is here too, which is behind the military complex and the royal barracks. And this is where warriors perfect their fighting arts and train to become the finest warriors, which is some smaller barracks, indoor practice fields, archery range, and armory, almost as equal to the one below the palace, and most of the military advisors for the Grand Vizier are here. And then finally, the last place to talk about is the Consecrated Sepulchre of Badna, which is a funky way of saying, of all the people that I've had relationships with in my long life, the Grand Vizier, our wonderful Abalakde, outlived them all. Is going to outlive them all. So what does she do? She entombs the remains of each of her consorts in this mausoleum next to a stone path that ascends to the door to her abode. Fluted columns mark the entrance to the crypt. Alabaster statues, sculptured by some of the most esteemed sculptors, adorn each vault, carved, preserve the lover's features across the centuries. Yeah, you know, if she gets to be your lover, she'll at least entomb you when you're dead. Positive. She's going to outlive you. Positive. But there you go. There's Raam. And as I said, it's an interesting city-state, but it's a place of chaos. It's a place of violence. It's a place of warlords. The noble class, which basically rule over the place, are a bunch of warlords. And yes, certainly speaking, there are those that are below them that keep things going. The Viziers keep the city going with the help of the Mansabdars. Yes, they're corrupt, but they are not open rebellion. You know, they're like, oh, I'm on your payroll. I'm going to do a lot of stuff to help you out, but I'm going to at least do the basics of my job. You know, I'm going to do the basics of my job. I'm going to do my basics of what I need to do. I'm going to keep the city going. And I think that's what it is I have to say. It's unrest, it's chaos, it's riots, but the city itself has not fallen. It's not complete anarchy. It's a bunch of people fighting each other, honestly to the death, a lot of times, battling with each other, and whether or not they've fallen, and some mob warlord families have fallen, more have grown, it's hard to say. It's a mess of a place. And, yeah, I'm going to say here, without going into details, nothing to do with the city is what caused the Grand Vizier's death in the storyline from 2nd edition. Nothing related to that. It was Sorcerer King/Queen stuff that she got involved with the others that got her killed. So keep that in mind if you want to dive into the storylines that were developed during 2nd edition. Again, we don't have those storylines in 4th edition, but this is the updated version of the earliest part of the history. And yeah, Raam's an interesting city because it's a city that's very controlled, but it's also a city that's very free in a lot of ways. The idea of the caste system is very restrictive on a lot of people. It doesn't mean you can't go beyond your caste. Certainly speaking, there are those that are rare individuals that can. Is it seen upon very positively? No, not necessarily, but if you've earned that, people will understand it. Unless you're unclean. Sorry, unclean people, you're left to your own devices. Not really liked by anybody, you're at the bottom, but you are left alone. And that's the best thing that they have for them. They're left alone. Interesting thought. You're left alone. You can kind of support yourself. Your important jobs in the city that are needed. So you're always going to have a job. No one wants to deal with you. They might be in better spot than the average citizen are. Disrespected by them. The better spot. It's an interesting thought for the city. That you see the population that's been suffering. That's just living in these squalid areas, doing the best they can. In a situation that's terrible for them, but is it any better than anywhere else? I don't know. There's a lot of... there's no oppression, but there's a lot of violence. There's gangs, street battles. It's hard to say. Raam is hard to compare to other places, and certainly speaking, having a large military means that as much as there's shit going on there, no one wants to really mess with them. And, again, as I said, as soon as you try to fight them, those warlords would forget their battles and be like, I'll get back to fighting you. There's someone that needs an ass-kicking first. Having that large army means that there isn't a lot of people that really would want to mess with them. And a lot of good equipment. So, whether or not 4th edition was planning on continuing the storylines that were told in 2nd edition, I don't know. But, whatever storylines you want to develop here, it's an interesting city nonetheless, with a lot of the chaos, the problems. It is ripe for adventure. And certainly as an outsider, you might have to deal with some shit when you get there. But, that shit could be an adventure in of itself. It's a thought. It makes it interesting things to think about. So, I'm glad you joined me for talking about Raam. I hope you enjoyed. This was a very interesting one to discuss, and as I said, it did kind of come across this entire... I knew about the 2 different books, but in my early comparison for things for like tier, I didn't see a lot of differences to think about diving into it. And I think that was my mistake in a lot of ways, where this tier didn't have a lot of storyline development in those times. They probably did have some that I just missed, but it didn't have it on as major levels as places like Raam. That's an interesting fact. And so learning about this, it has been a really good thing of a new topic to talk about when I'm done going through all the city-states and maybe some of the regions, I plan to go through most of the territories here, at least the city-states, and maybe I might combine together some of the various regions for non-city-state areas and stuff like that to kind of talk about who's living there and things like that. I'll see what I want to do post there. And if you want to check out more of my stuff, please make sure to check me out, whether it's on Twitch Live or over on YouTube. My Twitch schedule for the tabletop stuff, which most of you wouldn't really care about if you're here for this, is Tuesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, usually early afternoon, mid-early afternoon, kind of in that area. Tuesdays is the day I usually talk about Athas and Dark Sun and stuff like that. If you want to join me live. I do have a live play of Pathfinder 1st Edition on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Goes up on YouTube later on. And Discussing Tabletop, my show, where we talk about news of the week and more kind of podcasty thing. Saturdays at 6. Also, all that stuff goes up on YouTube. So you're going to catch it on YouTube. Social media link below. And, yeah. I mean, I do other stuff on Twitch if you want to check out my gaming, hanging, and all that kind of stuff. But that's up to you. I do plenty of stuff. And you can always check me out doing any of my various streams and activities, tabletop stuff. And honestly speaking, if you just want to hang out, watch me play a video game, and chat about tabletop, I'm not against that too. Because I'm always up to talk and discuss tabletop games like this one. But until next time, we dive into Dark Sun or somewhere else, and we go hang out with the Twitch people a little bit longer. But until that next time, for you folks over on YouTube, I bid all of you a deep and wonderful farewell.